Hey everyone, this is Josh for the Solopreneur Grind podcast, episode 97, and I am really excited to have the CEO and founder of The Sketch Effect, William Warren, with me. William, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, why don't we get started by having you tell us just a little bit more about yourself, what you're working on now, and then I'm excited to dig into the background a little further as well.
Yeah, let's do it. So I am a creative turned entrepreneur. So I never set out to do the business thing or to be an entrepreneur or a solopreneur or run a company. My whole life, I was obsessed with comics and cartoons and illustration and was always busy doodling and drawing. And that was my passion for a long, long time. And then my career took a couple twists and turns, and I ended up in a marketing role with a big quick service restaurant chain, and doing kind of marketing stuff, working with agency partners, a role that was fairly uncreative in the terms of I wasn't drawing or sketching. So in order to have a creative outlet while I was in that role, I started to sketch and doodle during meetings, really just to make the meetings more enjoyable for myself. So I'd have my sketchbook out and I would take notes, but I would also doodle in my notes. And word spread that there was this guy, William, in the marketing department who would draw during meetings. And sometimes I would get up on the whiteboard and draw for everyone to watch. Sometimes if I had a presentation to give, I would sketch out my concepts and scan them in and put them into my PowerPoint deck, really just to have a creative outlet and make what could be a mundane, boring work meeting or work presentation more exciting. But what happened is that people found value in that form of visual communication. They found value in taking concepts, marrying them with compelling visuals, and then presenting it in a way that's more impactful than it would be otherwise. And so that's when the kind of seeds of business started getting planted in my brain that maybe this was something that could be monetized, could be made into a business. I did some research. There were some other similar firms out there doing this kind of visual communication work. And based on the sense of demand and my passion for it, I decided to quit that job and started The Sketch Effect. This was in 2013, so almost 8 years ago, which is crazy. And it's been a wild ride ever since. I was, your classic solopreneur for about the first 3 years of that journey. And then by about the 3-year mark, I started hiring team members, got in office and started to scale up. So it's been a wild journey and a fun ride.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like it, and I definitely want to get into a little bit more detail. Before that marketing job, what were you doing at that point?
Sure. So like many people, I had an undergrad that I did not put to use. I got my undergrad was in political science. I was really interested in like editorial, maybe doing editorial cartooning or, something around that angle. And worked in DC for a short stint, decided I didn't want to do that. Came back to Atlanta where I'm from and went to grad school at Savannah College of Art and Design. Because like many people, when you don't know what to do, you just go back to school and get the next degree. So I got my master's degree in illustration, and around that time, I realized that this is an important part of my story, which is that I really love people. I like working with people and being a part of a team. And I realized that for many professional illustrators, it can be kind of a solo road, which many people love. Like that's how some people are wired. But I knew that I didn't want to work by myself in a studio for my 9 to 5. I wanted to work with people. And so that's part of the reason why I found out about this marketing role. It was entry level. I liked the company, seemed like a good company to work for. And so that's why I pursued that role. So I concurrently was finishing my art degree while also doing this marketing role and learning about business and learning about branding and sales and all sorts of stuff that I hadn't previously studied in school.
Right. And how did you end up landing that job? Because as you said, you kind of have like this smorgasbord of degrees and experiences, but it sounded like you were kind of pulled towards more of a team environment. Was this just simply you found a job post and you applied? Was it kind of through your network? And what made you ultimately want to accept that job?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So the role was an entry level at the time, part-time. Eventually it turned into full-time, but it was entry-level part-time marketing role. And I did have some folks in my network who put in a good word for me, kind of helped my resume skip that kind of first initial round of screening, which is always helpful to get it up to the right person. And then just interviewed. I think that for me, they were really looking for someone who was hard worker, could work with the agency partners we were working with, could write effectively, could communicate effectively. And so my degree in political science helps me build that. And yeah, so ended up getting the job, and I decided to accept it because throughout the interview process, I really was intrigued by the corporate culture and by the people I met, and it just seemed like the kind of place I wanted to be. And that was some career advice that someone had given me many years ago, which was, in your early years, focus less on getting the dream job and focus more on working for a company or for a person that you want to kind of mentor under or be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the impetus to accept the job and to sort of pivot away from the art kind of career, at least for the moment.
Right. And then was it everything you expected, or what was it like? I guess that's a lame way of asking it. How was it?
Well, I ended up leaving after 2.5 years, but no, it was amazing in the sense that I was surrounded by great leaders. I was exposed to, um, the basics of business and learned about marketing and sales and leadership, and worked with a lot of agency partners. So I learned what it was like to be on the client side of an agency client relationship, which has
Mm,
been super critical for the sketch effect for my business, because I know what it's like to be on the client side, and I know as a vendor, what to do and what not to do to make
right.
that relationship work. Um, and yeah, made a lot of friends that I'm still friends with to this day. But ultimately, I was not leveraging the gifts that I was given, that I was born with. I wasn't leveraging the passions and the skills that I had in the form of drawing and sketching. So that side of me was starting to shrivel up. The creative side of me was starting to wither away. And so, even though it was a fantastic job, it was not sustainable over the long term, because I knew that my passion wasn't in it. Um, and so it was almost like magical or providential, the fact that all of these things combined at once, in the sense that I started drawing it at work. I was learning about business, and I was hungry to do something new. So those three things combined, and it was sort of this magical moment where I thought, I'm going to start a business. I'm going to try my hand at this entrepreneurial thing, see how it goes.
Yeah, it's kind of funny in hindsight. It seems like so obvious, all these, when you're kind of doing the right things, and you get a few bounces, a few factors push you into the right direction. And in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, that's why it happened. But during the time, you don't necessarily see it coming, or feel it coming. William, I'm interested to know more about what was the first meeting where someone actually noticed what you were doing with the doodling. Like, what was the first instance where that was kind of brought out into the public being the company, I guess?
Yeah. I remember vividly, there was this one meeting we were in, and our team was prototyping a new marketing plan, or a new, what was it? It was a new marketing software and how it would impact the customer journey. And one of my teammates said, "Hey, William, I see your drawing in your notebook. Can you just like redraw that on the whiteboard? We can just kind of work through it together." And I said, "Sure." So I hopped up on the whiteboard and drew it out. We ended up spending an hour or two kind of plotting this journey, this visual customer journey of
Hmm.
this different stages the customer would go through, how this new software, this new um, marketing innovation would make that journey better and make the customer feel more successful and satisfied. And so that we end up taking that visual. I should look it up because this would be fun throwback. We end up taking that visual and then making it into a poster,
Hmm.
which our team then used to convince senior leaders that this new thing we were working on was a worthy investment. And so that was one of the very early moments where I realized that this thing that I'm doing really is adding value. I'm enjoying it, and people are enjoying it, are using it to enhance their work and to make their their work more successful, which has become the value proposition of the sketch effect, which is what we offer to our clients, is just to make them more successful at whatever they're doing by helping them communicate their ideas visually and adding that creativity and that fun.
Right. Awesome. Can you tell us a little more about what exactly are these sketches comprised of? Like when you were in those meetings, are you just kind of doodling around almost like note taking but in doodle form? Was it only for specific aspects that had a visual piece to it? And then maybe we can relate it to what you do now with the sketch effect. Like what are the types of visuals that you're producing?
So the industry term is called graphic recording. That's technically what I was starting to experiment with in that old job. The term has a lot of different names. You might hear live scribe or visual note taking or doodler or live sketching or sketch notes. There's a lot of different terms for what we do, but the industry term is graphic recording, and it's essentially taking content, which is typically spoken in real time in a meeting context, but taking content, synthesizing it, and then translating it into visual language using typography, color, shapes, icons, and of course, illustrations. So it's a combination of text, it's a combination of images, and then it's all put together using visual treatments like color and navigational elements and wayfinding and stuff like that. So that's basically what I was starting to do, and what we do now at the Sketch Effects. That's one of our core services is graphic recording or live sketching, where and by we I mean our team of artists. We have I think nine or 10 artists on our team that can do this sketching thing. But essentially, we attend our clients' events, whether it's a conference or a meeting or a trade show or a brainstorm session or a strategic planning meeting. We attend their events, we listen to their content. So we're actively listening, and then we're synthesizing, and then we're producing visual artifacts that encapsulate what they were covering. And so obviously, as you can imagine, you might be connecting the dots, but the last 14 months has been very disruptive for our business, as every live event was basically shut down. So we had to make a pivot quickly to adapt our service to virtual meetings and virtual events. And grateful we made that pivot, because if not, we might have gone out of business. But we ended up launching a virtual sketching service, ended up becoming our most popular service and our primary driver of revenue over the last year.
Awesome. Well, it's good to hear that you guys did make that pivot, as a lot of businesses have had to do in the last 14 months. I want to go
that's
back.
That's the entrepreneurial spirit, is just, making it work. And I love it. It's been amazing to see other businesses pivot and make it work, even when life is going crazy. They're committed to making it work. I love it.
Absolutely. You have to have a little bit of that, right? If not more than a little bit. Otherwise you might not be around too long.
That's right.
So, William, let's go back in time, back to that. You're still working at the company. These doodles we should probably call them more than just doodles, but they're starting to kind of catch on. And like you said, almost like the light goes off in your head, right? You're thinking about entrepreneurship. What was that process like in terms of going from 9-to-5 employee to what was kind of the build up or the lead up to deciding, okay, I want to start my business, and then actually pulling the trigger and quitting your job?
Great question. So it was definitely a slow build. It wasn't like a one day I just said, I'm going to quit. It was a thing that definitely unfolded slowly over probably about 6 months. But in essence, because I was starting to draw in meetings at work, I was essentially prototyping the product with a real captive audience, seeing what people liked, seeing what they didn't like, seeing how it was best utilized. And a lot of entrepreneurs don't get that opportunity to kind of prototype their product or service in kind of a controlled laboratory environment, which is essentially what I was doing. But then it started to build when folks outside of the company, like either people visiting the corporate office or the agency partners that we were working with, would see what I was doing and then ask me to come do that for them and pay me. That was when the prototyping started turning into actual validation. So I was prototyping the product, and then I started to validate it by seeing what people would be willing to pay. and how they would receive it and how it can add the most value. And so I probably had maybe 4 or 5 gigs, as I called them, as we call them now, where I would use PTO to go and leave and go to a company event or conference and do this sketching thing, figuring out what to charge, figuring out how to scope it, how to put together like this creative service into a package that people paid for. But I had a thing in Dallas that I was flown out to, Dallas, Texas, and then had another one down in Orlando, Florida, and then a few in Atlanta, and then there were 2 clients that wanted to hire me to come to their conference in DC and in New Orleans in January, which was about 5 or 6 months down the road. And I thought, hey, this is kind of cool. Like, people are willing to like book me to come to this event that's months from now. So at that point, I realized this is cool. This is fun. People are validating my work in the form of paying me to do it and flying me, booking me hotels and flights. And so it was at that moment where I thought it's time to make a jump. So that whole journey from initial prototyping to using PTO to do these gigs was probably about 6 months.
Right.
And then also I had people at my company tell me, they say, William, if you start this business, I will literally hire you to come back and do it tomorrow.
Right.
So I kind of knew that I was going to have a built-in client already, in addition to the 5 or 6 others that had already committed to work with me. So that's a quick recap of that process of going from just doodling to stepping out and starting a business.
Yeah, and it's such a great and kind of natural way to do it. I say from the dozens and dozens of entrepreneurs, solopreneurs that I've talked to, they kind of fall under 2 camps. The first camp is they quit and they just try to start day one, the next day with kind of nothing. And a lot of people figure it out that way. It just might take a little bit longer, and you might lose a little bit more sleep the first few weeks or the first few months. And then there's the second camp, which you're clearly in, which is more of the figuring it out while you're still fully employed. I mean, one way to look at it, Will, is like you were getting paid to test this out, and they ended up becoming one of your clients. So it's almost like, you couldn't have done it better. When you have people, as you said, paying you money, booking you flights, there's no better validation, right?
Exactly.
So that sounds like a great way to do it. Now, can you talk us through kind of like the first 6 to 12 months? You quit your job, you have a couple clients lined up. How did you kind of work through the first bit? What was like the first day like, right? You wake up, you don't have to go into an office. You're your own boss. You have some clients, but I'm assuming, you still wanted to build up the client list. Did you have your pricing down? Walk us through the first maybe 6 months of what that was like.
So the first 6 months was definitely a learning curve. In hindsight, I'm glad I did not know what I did not know at the time, because had I known, I may have not wanted to do it, because it was a lot of work. There were some nights where I was working until 4 or 5 in the morning to get the client work done. Because, like I said, for the first couple of years, it was just me doing everything, doing the sales, doing the operations, doing the actual delivery of the product, doing the actual drawing and sketching. So learned a lot, but my mindset was I was always oriented towards action. So taking whatever is the next step I can take. And, whether that was getting a really crude website set up, hiring somebody to build that for me, getting my books set up, because I didn't know anything about accounting or anything about that. Figuring out what to charge, because sometimes I would put a price tag on it and be like, oh, that's super high, no one's going to buy it. But then they say yes. And then I'm like, oh, okay. Or the opposite, where I make it, I go really high, and then, no one wants to buy it. So a lot of just figuring it out, but just taking it step at a time, continuing to try to make it better. I'm a big believer in just the kind of make it better mindset of like, what I'm doing now, everything can be improved,
Right.
no matter what it is. And so, yeah, those first 6 months was a lot of work. It was hard. I remember sitting with my wife and kind of looking at the books, and at the time had no idea how to read a P&L or anything like that. And we looked at the numbers and we thought, I'm not making any money. This is not working. Turns out we had made an error with how we calculated it, so it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But I remember that was a really dire moment where we kind of crunched the numbers and thought that the business wasn't profitable. But yeah, every day was an adventure, and just not knowing what I didn't know, but committing to learn every day and continuing to make it better.
Right. What would you tell someone then who's about to be in that position? Maybe someone who's about to go out on their own or just started on their own, maybe two or three tips or pieces of advice that you wish you did know back in those days?
So I love this question because it's tapping into the heart of my new thing. As an entrepreneur, you're always thinking of the next thing. But my new side hustle, if you want to call it that, is a platform which is geared to give advice, just like you're soliciting right now. Because now that I'm almost 8 years into this, in hindsight, there are a lot of things I've learned along the way that I did not know when I started. And so I've created a new platform. It's called theconqueringcreative.com, also on Instagram at The Conquering Creative. But the whole purpose of that is just to offer no nonsense business advice for creatives who are looking to start their own business, looking to make their side hustle their main hustle, or maybe they have their own business and they're just trying to take it to the next level. So no nonsense business advice, but also some practical resources. Like there's a business model canvas that people can download, a delegation guide, a handful of other things, and then also finally encouragement and just sort of some words of positivity, because it's a hard road, it's a lonely road, and if you're not staying encouraged and positive, you'll burn out. But to answer your question, the two things that I always harp on for people that are contemplating starting their own thing or going off on their own or making their side hustle their main hustle is, number one is to audit your time. In the early days, your time is your most precious, well, not early, any time, honestly, your time is your most precious resource, especially for creative entrepreneurs, which I was, and most of my audience at The Conquering Creative are. Your time is your most precious resource. It's the only thing that you cannot replenish. It's dwindling, it's finite. And I think a lot of creatives don't spend enough time analyzing what they're spending their time on. And so I'm a huge believer in time tracking. Everything I do, I'm tracking my time. I'm auditing it. I'm looking at where my time's going. Where did I spend my time on things that added value, and where did I spend my time on things that were a waste? Because as an entrepreneur, you want to deploy your time into the areas that will drive the most impact. So a good example for that one of my mistakes is I waited way too long to delegate invoicing. For like 2 or 3 years, I did all my invoicing, maybe because it was a control thing, I don't know. But I remember I would spend every Friday adding up my invoices and sending them out. It would take me hours and hours and hours, and I hated it, and I would make mistakes and I would get things wrong. And then finally, about 3 years in, I hired someone, and one of her roles was to do invoicing, and she was good at it, and she liked it, and she was sharp, and she could do it faster than me. And I kind of joke that my favorite meeting I ever had was our invoice review, because it would be like 20 minutes. We just run through the invoices, and I'd say, looks good, looks good, looks good, great, send them. And just remember that once upon a time, I would spend hours doing that. Mm-hmm. So the time thing is a big one. And then related to that is also look for things you can delegate as soon as possible. And a lot of solopreneurs, the word delegation doesn't really seem like something that they need to worry about, because when you think of delegation, you think about asking some low-level intern to do something, or some employee. But delegation is getting anyone or anything to do something that isn't worth your time, or you're not good at, or you don't love. So a good example might be getting invoicing software, or getting accounting software. That's a form of delegation, because you're basically trusting the software to do it. Or hiring someone to do your taxes, or hiring someone to set up your LLC, or in my case, getting someone to do invoicing, or whatever that thing is. I encourage creatives to consider, what are they good at, what do they love, what is something that only they can do, and if it's worth their time. If the answer is no to any of those things, then you should try to get that off your plate. Mm-hmm. So that's those are two things that in hindsight, I wish I had done a better job from the outset, is just looking at my time more closely, and then also delegating more deliberately.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I mean, the reality too is, as a solopreneur, you're going to hit your upper limit in terms of revenue unless you start delegating, right? You're just going to run out of hours in the day. Which also kind of segues to what I wanted to ask next, which is after those first 2-3 years, I'd love to hear a little bit more about growing the team, right? Hiring, what was that like, right? Going from one person to two, or getting to 3, 4, people on the team. What has that kind of evolution and growth of the company been like? And how different has it been? Is it enjoyable for the same ways that the solopreneur success has been, or maybe contrast the two evolutions of the company?
Sure, that's a great question. So I had dabbled with hiring during those first couple years in the form of working with contractors, and then hired a part-time admin and a few other things. So I'd kind of dipped my toe in the water of hiring a little bit. And that's another bit of advice I would give, is always to, try before you buy, like do a test drive before you pull the trigger, date before you marry. I'm a huge believer that, you don't want to go out and be like, I'm going to hire these people, and then just hire a bunch of people, and then you're stuck with maybe not the right people. But if you can kind of test drive people, I guess it's kind of a weird way to phrase it. But if you can kind of test drive a employer relationship, and if it's working, then you can fully commit. If it's not working, you can kind of cut your losses and move on. But I mentioned earlier that I love teams. I love working with people. And so after about 2 years, I realized that I needed to start getting a team around me. One, because I love working with people, but also, to your point, there was a cap on how successful, how high the business could grow, just relying on me and a couple contractors. So what I did was I looked at my time and I said, what are some things that I could get someone else to do that would free me up to make the most impact and work on the business versus working in the business? And so for me, that was, it was storyboarding. It was doing some rough sketches. It was about a handful of kind of creative tasks that somebody else could do. And so I hired my first employee to help me with that. And that just freed up my time again to focus on the business. And so then a few months later, I realized that, hey, we're growing fast. I need someone who can do all the operational stuff, who can liaison with clients, who can run timelines, who can, quarterback with our contractors. And so the next hire was a full-time operations person, which was amazing. And she's still with me to this day. So that was just amazing growth happened at that point, because all of a sudden I wasn't worrying about sending deliverables or doing timelines or, running the projects. I could focus again on that growing the business piece. And and then from there, it was just kind of continuing to make hires when it made sense. So we hired a full-time animator, and then another full-time illustrator, and then eventually a second operations person who was the invoicing person I told you about. And made some mistakes, made some bad hires, but made a lot of good hires too. And that's the thing, is you just want to make sure you're getting the right people on the bus. And those that don't belong there, try to get them off as soon as possible.
Right. Yeah. It's so important, right? I mean, a company is only as good as the people that are running it. Do you have 1 or 2 quick tips, Will, on hiring besides the kind of, date before you get married? Because I think the other thing that people often overlook is, if it's not a good fit, it's probably not a good fit for both sides, right? So,
Exactly.
so like you said, pull the plug, rip the Band-Aid, and both parties will probably be better off in the long run.
Exactly. This is another kind of area that we could talk about, but I think a huge factor in hiring is culture, and knowing what is your culture, and then vetting that in your applicants. So at the Sketch Effect, we have 6 core values. We have a mission statement. We have a purpose statement. So why are we even doing this besides just to have a job and to make money? But like, what is the deeper purpose? And then we also have a vision statement. And so what we do in our interviews is we weave in questions that are wired or that are designed to get an understanding of if this person lines up with those core values and can get excited about the purpose. So one of our core values is positivity. We like to brighten everyone's day. It's part of our culture. We want to have fun. We want our clients to feel like they enjoy working with us. And so we vet that in hiring. If somebody comes in and they're just stone faced the whole time, and they're just oozing with like, I don't know, what's the opposite of positive? Negativity, or you can kind of get a sense of that, then they're not going to get very far in our hiring process.
Right.
And so yeah, that's one thing that we've done is we've tried to embed our core values in our questions we ask applicants and see if they line up. And then we continue to vet them once they're hired. If there's something that they're doing that's really well, we call it out and give them a shout out, and then we tie it back to one of the core values. Like, hey, so-and-so did a really great job of demonstrating adaptability. This is how they did it. Great job. Here's a $20 gift card or whatever. And at the same time, if somebody slips up and does something that, we want to call out, well, one, we do it privately. We don't do it publicly. And we always tie it back to a core value and say, hey, that the way you talk to so-and-so really didn't line up with our core value of positivity, or the way that the way this thing happened didn't line up with our core value of whatever. So we try to tie it all back to the core values and to our key behaviors, which has been really, really healthy way to go about developing, not only hiring people, but then also developing them.
Yeah, I love that. I think ultimately what you've done with that is you're objectifying something that it can inherently be very subjective, right? Are you a good employee? Are you a bad employee, right? Which can be entirely subjective. But, kind of along the lines of the Ray Dalio kind of principles approach, you have these core values, people see them, you're actually evaluating people based on them. You're not just kind of, oh, hey, here's the resume, et cetera, et cetera. And then everything good and bad is being linked back to them. So it's much easier for people to make that connection and probably learn from it and not make the same mistakes, or continue to make those great decisions and continuing to grow the company. That's really great, Will. That's probably one key takeaway of many that I'll be taking from this, which is awesome. So, Will, I just want to spend the last few minutes chatting about your side hustle, right? As you said, entrepreneurs, typically, you always got something going on back of your mind, or, side hustle sort of thing. How did this one come to be? And how do you now manage your time, considering, business owner, you got a big team, I'm sure that, has enough responsibilities, side hustle. How do you split your time? How do you manage the two of them?
Man, amazing question. I'm still trying to figure out the second part of that with the time piece. But yeah, this new side hustle really kind of just emerged from something I've been wanting, to do for a long time, which is to kind of give back to people that are on the same journey that I have been on, but are at earlier stages. And, I love content creation. I love writing. I love drawing. As a CEO, I don't do that much of it anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm spending most of my 9 to 5, working with the team, managing my employees, doing product development and strategy and stuff like that. So it's almost like a new outlet for me to draw and to write and to get my thoughts out on paper or on the page.
Mm-hmm. It's almost ironic to hear that, Will, because you started this new company to go back to drawing, and now you've kind of come, full circle, but you're not drawing. You, like you said, you have the CEO duties. And so then you're naturally kind of pulled back towards the drawing again. But obviously in a much, really good scenario right now. But anyways, I cut you off there.
No, that's an amazing paradox, and it's not lost on me. and I actually did a podcast interview a week or so ago with an art school, or an art kind of a work art-based podcast, and they asked me that question, and I have to build in rhythms of creativity into my life, or else again the same thing's going to happen. So
right.
It's an amazing point or paradox you pointed out. But yeah, so I just love, I've loved learning about business, and looking back, I think it's less intimidating and less scary than a lot of creatives think it's going to be. It's also less boring. So that's sort of that's what we're trying to conquer. Is we're trying to conquer the false notion that business is really, really hard. I mean, it is hard, but it's not impossible. We're trying to conquer the notion that business is boring or not exciting. And it is. It's very exciting. It's an adventure. It can unlock so much potential for a creative. And then we're also trying to conquer the assumption that business is what's the last one? Boring, scary, or intimidating? I'm not sure, but we're trying to conquer all that. I'm trying to help people understand that they can do it. They have what it takes, and if they don't have it, they can learn it. And so yeah, it's been fun. I've been doing blogs on the website, some content on Instagram, thinking about to get a YouTube channel up and running, and then eventually want to do a podcast because I love the medium of podcasts. I think it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that's kind of what we've been doing, and it's been a lot of fun, and not sure where it's going to go, but I think it's one of those things that could expand one day. I do love writing. That goes back to my undergrad days. I love writing, so maybe a book down the road might be something I want to try. But it's right now I'm just having fun. It's not monetized. It's just a content platform, and yeah, I would love for people to check it out if it seems interesting for them.
Absolutely, and we're going to link to both the websites, the Sketch Effect and the Conquering Creative, in the description. Whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening to the podcast, we'll have that in the description below. So, Will, last question for you is to those maybe creatives out there. Maybe they're not creatives, right? Maybe they're your average Joe, or whoever, a young professional. They're working a 9 to 5. They're thinking about something like this, going out on their own. Do you have maybe one or two more general pieces of advice? What would you tell them, or what would you tell yourself? William, working at the marketing company way back when, having known what you know now and having been through the really awesome journey that you've been through so far?
The first thing I would say is don't underestimate the power of a network. Just having friends and a network will pay dividends down the road. And you might make some relationships now that don't return any value for years, but down the road they might make that one connection or introduce you to that client. And so I think for a lot of creatives, a lot of people that are kind of in that state, the notion of networking is kind of like horrible. Like the thought of going to some like cheesy hotel bar and like talking to strangers is awful. So that's not the kind of network I'm talking about. I'm talking about getting plugged into a community, getting plugged into a peer group, an entrepreneur group, a side hustler group. There's these networks everywhere. So in Atlanta, here where I live, I joined one almost right away. And it was me, it was 6 other entrepreneurs. We had a mentor or coach. We met for once a month for almost 4 years. And just those relationships built more relationships, and the network grew. And so, yeah, don't underestimate the power of building a good network, even if you feel like it's not needed at the moment. Because it all comes down to relationships. It comes down to who you know and having the right connection. So be deliberate about building that. And then the other bit of advice I would give is to work on your self-leadership. Like, you might not be leading a business yet. You might be just kind of doing your grind 9 to 5 thing, kind of working the lame job, and you might not feel inclined to like work on yourself and kind of build good habits and build good financial rhythms and learn communication skills. But it's never too early to start working on that stuff. Not only will it benefit you in your current job, but it will also set you up for success down the road. So work on your time management, your budgeting, your health, like try not to sleep in too late, like all these things that I remember looking back on when I was in my mid-20s, like stuff I wish I had just done sooner. I kind of gotten control over some parts of my life. So those are two kind of general bits of advice that I would give to people that are in that phase.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that the two really interesting parts about them is, like you said, number one, it's never too early for either, right? No matter what even if you're staying in a 9 to 5 for another decade or two, right? Expanding your network, never a bad thing. Maybe you get fired. Maybe you start a business. Maybe you don't, whatever. And then, personal, mental, physical health, right? Kind of goes without saying. They also have compounding effects, right? The healthier you are, the better you're going to work. Maybe you get a raise quicker. Maybe your business does better because you're healthier. You're thinking straighter. So they both actually really go hand in hand.
Exactly.
Quite well. Awesome, Will. Well, this has been incredible. Loved hearing your story, your journey, the main hustle, the side hustles. It's all great. Can you let us know one more time, maybe a little bit about the two websites or where people can find you?
Sure. Yeah. If people are interested in learning more about what we do with the Sketch Effect, how we go and doodle in meetings, and do all that kind of crazy stuff, go to thesketcheffect.com. We actually just launched a brand new website. It's a few months old and we love it. A lot of cool content on there. And then if you're a creative entrepreneur or solopreneur, or you're thinking about leaving your job and starting your thing, or you have your side thing, you want to make it your main thing, then I would encourage them to check out theconqueringcreative.com. That's the new platform I'm working on. There's a lot of resources there, some blogs, other podcast interviews, and then shoot me an email and let me know what's a topic that you'd like me to cover and dig into. Because I'm always interested in hearing what people actually need to learn, what they're hungry to learn, and would love to connect.
Awesome. And if you reach out, let them know you came from the Solopreneur Grind podcast, episode 96. Will, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is a lot of fun. Great conversation. Hopefully it's a value add to your listeners. And thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome.